It's been exactly 1 month since a gunman opened fire at the 4th of July parade in the Chicago suburb of Highland Park. 7 people died in the attack, with dozens more suffering injuries. And the shooting rocked the community with a diverse set of victims: a 78-year-old Latino grandfather, a 63-year-old Jewish synagogue employee, and a couple in their 30s who died protecting their 2-year-old son. It's a story where Highland Park joins the list of communities that are now synonymous with tragedy. Uvalde, Buffalo, El Paso, Parkland, Sandy Hook, Columbine. These communities found strength in the aftermath of mass shootings. In a lot of those cases, it comes from houses of worship. In recent years, many attacks have hit largely Jewish communities. This story of a community dealing with tragedy and looking for healing and change is unfolding again in Highland Park. People who lost their friends and neighbors are still looking for answers and often turning to communities of faith. Newsy's Ben Shamiso was reporting for us from Highland Park in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, and he went back there for us to find out more.
For survivor Howard Prager, being back at the scene of the Highland Park mass shooting and playing the tuba once again, this time to honor the 7 victims, is part of the grieving process.
They can't be forgotten, and the people who are injured and the people who survived can't be forgotten either.
A month ago at the 4th of July parade, Prager and his klezmer band were playing a joyful Yiddish tune when the mass shooting started. This video from Chicago Sun-Times journalist Lynn Sweet shows people running for their lives, but for a moment the band keeps on playing.
I liken it when people ask, I said, I think it was like the orchestra on the Titanic. They didn't know the ship was going down. They saw people maybe running about, but they didn't know what was happening. We didn't either.
A month after you survived this tragedy, what do you need to be able to move forward?
Time. I don't know how much time.
A month after the 4th of July tragedy that happened right here in the Chicago suburb of Highland Park, this area is open to the public again and shops are back in business. On the surface, it looks like life is back to normal, but for survivors and the community, the grieving process is only beginning.
When you come here, you could just feel peace.
In this small church in Highwood, just a mile away from downtown Highland Park, mental health services are offered in English and Spanish for free.
Once people call us and we tell them that they're going to receive independent counseling, they say, well, how much is this going to cost me? And so when we tell them, no, all of our services are free, you can feel that sense of relief.
Carmen Platan and Viridiana Gonzalez work at the Highwood Public Library across the street, but have a partnership with the church. Over 50% of the Highwood population is Hispanic. Many are undocumented and living in poverty.
It was about 50% of the participants at the parade were from Highwood.
Patlan is the library's executive director. She's long been on a mission to break down the stigma around mental health among Hispanic immigrants.
I came to this country undocumented. I understand.
Over 30 survivors came to the library for a group session the day after the shooting, many of them children.
They kept looking at the door, asking us, is the door locked? They were still wearing the same clothing they were wearing the day before. They didn't want to go in their pajamas because they wanted to be ready to run if necessary.
Patlan and her mental health staff have already assisted 550 community members since the tragedy. They say they will continue to do so for as long as it is needed.
Just yesterday, we had a call about this person who is very in the community, and he said that he did not really trust, did not want to leave his house. But just yesterday, he felt like he could call us and ask for help, finally. So knowing that even after a month, we are still that safe place for people to go, that was very meaningful and impactful for me.
This is the main sanctuary, and you can see that you could, and we did for our vigil service and things like that, we had chairs all the way back to that wall.
Back in Highland Park, Rabbi Isaac Serrata has been working tirelessly to offer spiritual comfort to his Makom Soleh lakeside congregation.
Just trying to be there as much as possible for the people who reach out.
About half of the Highland Park population is Jewish, and 5 of the 7 victims were either Jewish or part of Jewish families. One of them, Catherine Goldstein, was a member of this synagogue.
Katie was one of the nicest, sweetest, most gentle people that you would ever have the pleasure of meeting. Her husband told me that he's gotten phone calls from all these different people who said that Katie was their best friend.
Serrata says part of his job as a faith leader is to give people permission to mourn.
Part of it is not using that word healing yet, right? Not that much, you know, because I think that it's still very raw for people, and in some sense people need to be told it's okay to not get over this, that in fact our tradition teaches us that you don't get over loss anyway, you get through it.
Ben Chamisso, Newsy, Highland Park, Illinois.
Thanks to Ben for that reporting and for telling those impactful stories from Highland Park. Roughly half of Highland Park's population is Jewish. Let's also be clear here. Law enforcement officials have not announced a motive for the shooting, but posts connected to the suspect have included hateful comments about multiple minority groups, including Jews. And regardless of the motive in Highland Park, a rise in the number of anti-Semitic attacks have left American Jews on edge. A survey released in April by the Jewish civil rights group, the Anti-Defamation League, found that anti-Semitic incidents hit an all-time high in 2021, with the number of incidents nearly tripling since 2015. And last fall, polling done by SSRS for the American Jewish Committee found that 90% of American Jews felt anti-Semitism was a problem in the US, with 82% saying they thought anti-Semitism increased in the previous 5 years. We've seen these fears translate into tragedy and loss of life. In the last few years, there have been several attacks on synagogues in the US. In January, a gunman took 4 people hostage during a service at the Congregation Beth Israel Synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. In April 2019, on the last day of the Jewish holiday of Passover, an openly anti-Semitic shooter killed a woman and wounded 3 others, including a rabbi at the Chabad Synagogue in Poway, California, not too far from San Diego. That attack followed an attack in October 2018, where a shooter with anti-Semitic beliefs killed 11 people and wounded 6 others in a shooting during a Saturday morning service at the Tree of Life Synagogue in the heavily Jewish Pittsburgh neighborhood of Squirrel Hill. 3 congregations shared that synagogue, all of whom had to come to grips with the tragedy.
We knew that obviously something terrible had happened, but we sort of knew who it was that the terrible things had happened to, but it wasn't until later in the evening that the coroner's office actually was willing to release and confirm who survived and who did not that day. The following week was spent attending funerals.
One funeral after the other, if you could even get into the funeral homes.
New Light congregation lost 3 of its members that day: Richard Gottfried, Daniel Stein, and Melvin Wax. Each of the congregations that had been using Tree of Life Synagogue moved out, but in the weeks afterward, members still sought their connection to their faith.
People were looking for reassurance. They were looking to be told if things can be not all right, but supportive. They were looking for reassurance that we were all still gonna, be able to be together. And they didn't want to, enough had already changed in the horror of that. And they wanted the reassurance we could still be there to hug each other, be there for services.
In Squirrel Hill, healing has become more than just a matter of faith. Government officials, synagogues, and nonprofits came together to form a partnership that provides mental health options to the community.
There's really no one way to heal. There's no one right way to heal. So what works for somebody is not going to work for another. And when you have a community trauma like the mass shooting that occurred in Pittsburgh, it's hard to find ways for an entire community to heal.
That healing can cut across communities and bring places that suffered tragedy together. In Squirrel Hill, members who were invited to Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, which suffered a mass shooting of its own in 2015, remembered how connected they felt.
The pastor called us up to the front of the room, and we expected him to say a benediction or something nice. Instead, he called up the entire congregation to come and hug us. There must have been about 500 people in the room. And we are probably about 10 to 15 individuals. And we were just surrounded by love, by compassion. And it's events like that make you feel that you know, that we are family, that we are all one. We are all trying to face this together and to try to move on.
And synagogues have a role to play in healing for the community, even when the attacks aren't explicitly anti-Semitic. They can provide help in the weeks, days, and sometimes even the immediate moments after a mass shooting. Rabbi Brad Boxman of Congregation Kol Tikva in Parkland, Florida, saw that firsthand when his synagogue became an emergency place of refuge during the 2018 mass shooting, less than a mile away from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
When it all began, because we're only half a mile from the synagogue, and the synagogue being a vibrant center for our youth, the first place they thought to run was to the synagogue. Even though the non-Jewish kids went to Dunkin' Donuts and 7-Eleven and other places, our kids came here. They knew that this would be their home where they would be taken care of.
Rabbi Boxman told us that a rabbi has a major role to play in guiding communities through the immediate aftermath. Parkland, similar to Highland Park, has a large Jewish population. 5 of the 17 victims in the Parkland shooting were Jewish, and 4 of them had connections to the synagogue.
I think in any trauma, you run on adrenaline. I learned as a rabbi that the most important thing I can do is to try to be the calm in the midst of the storm, and you deal with your pain and sorrow afterwards. But a leader, I think, has to kind of absorb a lot of that. And so just trying to get the families through the first days and weeks of mourning.
And he's quick to point out that it's about more than just healing and care in the moment. Congregations can help push for change. He and several young members who later helped organize the March for Our Lives movement against gun violence spoke with Florida officials and protested at the state legislature.
They say that religion is there to comfort the afflicted, but also to afflict the comfortable. And coming out of the Reformed Jewish tradition, that's the prophetic tradition, I believe strongly that Judaism has to live by standing up for the values that we cherish. And if we just speak them idly in the synagogue, but they don't manifest themselves in real action outside the synagogue, then we are false to ourselves.
Sometimes that advocacy does lead to change. Florida passed a red flag law to tighten gun purchases. And after Highland Park, the House of Representatives passed a ban on semi-automatic assault weapons. But that bill may not make it through the Senate.